Hi everyone, meet again with Movie Recap here. This time I'm going to talk about the movie called The Shawshank Redemption. The film briefly revolves around a banker named Andy Dufresne, who is sentenced to life in Shawshank prison on charge of killing his wife and cheating. But he claims he never did, so what's the story? Let's just look at the storyline.
What are you Jimmy staring at? Back to work! Let's go to work!
Well, where I get hazy is where the cleaning woman shows up the following morning and finds your wife.
The scene begins with Andy Dufresne who is in his car. He then pulls out a gun and continues by gulping down liquor before entering a house. Then the scene moved to a court. Andy recounted that night he was angry with his wife for wanting a divorce with him. His wife then packed her clothes and decided to stay with her affair, Glenn Quentin, a reliable golfer. That night Andy came in and saw they were making love. Andy claimed his condition was still controllable and did not shoot them. He chose to leave them and then threw his gun into the river. Prosecutors believe he killed his wife and her affair because of evidence against him. At the crime scene, police found them dead with a .38 caliber bullet, and also the police didn't find Andy's gun in the river. Other than that, the fingerprints of the suspects and the fragments of his drink bottle had become enough evidence that Andy was the perpetrator of the murder. Then finally, the judge decided Andy was sentenced to 2 life sentences.
2 life sentences back to back. 1 for each of your victims.
The story moves on to an inmate named Alice Boyd, commonly called Red. He was called to a jury for his appeal after serving 20 years in prison from a life sentence. But the jury again rejected his appeal even though he had already shown a good behavior while in prison. Red then became a supplier of illegal goods such as cigarettes and drugs to prisoners. Andy entered this prison in 1947 and he began to know Red in 1949. This prison is known as Shawshank, which is intended for sniper-class inmates with a very long sentence. Hundreds of inmates at this prison welcomed the arrival of Andy and other prisoners who has just arrived.
Looked like a stiff breeze would blow him over.
Samuel Norton introduced Hadley as his chief warden. He was such a ruthless man that no one dared to fight him.
Maggot dick motherfucker!
As usual, they will bath and clean before occupying the prison room.
Lights out!
After some time living here, Andy began to be able to adapt to this prison, and the figure he started talking to was Red. Andy asked him for a small hammer and a limestone.
I wonder if you might get me a rock hammer.
What?
It is known that Andy had worked as a stone digger until he became a bank director. After that, Red warns Andy about the sister group, especially their leader named Box.
Sisters have taken quite a liking to you.
Red with his joke guessed Andy would use the little hammer to dig a tunnel. Red finally managed to smuggle the little hammer into the prison. Red laughed at Andy because with that hammer he would need 600 years to dig a tunnel. Brooks, who works delivering the book, gives that hammer to Andy.
Here's your book.
Until one day, Andy starts to be the target of the sister blessing. The first 2 years were a difficult time for Andy. At that time, the warden recruited several inmates for the treatment of the prison roof. Red and Andy were selected in this program for a month. While they were at work, Andy overheard talk about the money Hadley got from his brother who died worth $35,000.
You gonna see any of that?
Andy then offered his service to Hadley to manage his financial records because Andy used to be a director of the bank. He knew that the value of insurance would multiply. When the movie shows, Andy asked for a poster of Rita Hayworth, who was then a famous artist, to be displayed in the cell. Not long after, Andy got the poster following his order Bible from Red, and when the search took place in his cell room, officers did not suspect the function of the objects.
Can't say I approve of this. But I suppose I hate to deprive you of this. Salvation lies within.
Then Andy was transferred to help Brooks in the library room of Shawshank Prison. Brooks has served in the library since 1912.
Earl Stanley Gardeners. Every evening I load up the cart and make my round.
And Andy also helps a warden manage his finances. He also sent a letter every week to the government to provide funds to improve the prison library. Because he was very good at finances, and he was trusted by all officers to take care of their financial records. Until finally, Andy asked Red to be his staff. A year passed, and he continued to send letters every week to the government to improve the library. That day, Brooks had already served 50 years and was granted parole. But after getting out of prison, he didn't know what to do because he was too at home with his routine in prison, until he finally chose to kill himself in his room. Besides that, because of the boredom of the government receiving letters from Andy, they ended up sending funds and books to the prison library. While cleaning the library, Andy played a song throughout the prison. All the prisoners seemed to enjoy this song, but not the chief warden. So immediately put Andy into the isolation room. Red again called the jury in order to apply for parole after serving a sentence of 30 years, but again, his application was rejected by the jury. Andy comforted him by giving a harmonica to Red, and Red gave him a poster. Improvement to the library began, and in honor of Brooks, his name was used as the name of this library.
Andy had transformed the storage room smelling of rat turds and turpentine.
Apparently, Norton, who is the head of the prison, always gets a lot of bribes from contractors who want to fix this prison. This was known to Andy because he was the one who was assigned to record all his financial transactions. The sign of the arrival of a new prisoner in the prison reads, "He is Tommy William, who came to Shawshank in 1965 with a sentence of 2 years in prison. He was arrested for stealing a TV. His story made Red and his friends quite entertained. Because he has a desire to learn, here Andy taught him as if he was in school."
So Andy took Tommy under his wing and started walking him through it.
Red described the case that ensnared Andy, which resulted in him being punished. In this moment, Tommy also told that 4 years ago he was caught stealing a car and put in a cell with a man named Elmo Blatch, who works as a robber. Here Elmo tells me that he once killed a woman and cheated on her, who was a golfer. And funnily enough, even her husband, who was accused and arrested even though he was innocent, worked as a bank director. Knowing that, Andy immediately told his case to Norton, hoping he could help him with Tommy as a witness.
It's obvious this fella Williams is impressed with you.
But instead of helping him, he was worried that if Andy was free, then his crime would be reported by Andy, and he was put back in solitary confinement for a month.
It's my life, don't you understand? It's my life! Get him out! Get him out!
One night, Tommy is called by the chief warden in outer courtyard, and suddenly, he is shot dead by Hadley. While the chief warden told Andy it was done because he intended to escape. After being released from the isolation room, Andy only pensive to Red. He said if he could get out of this prison, he would like to go to Zihuatanejo in Mexico to spend the rest of his life on the beach in a boat. And he took the Red with him. Then Andy asked the Red to promise him if he got out of this prison to go to Boston, and there was a black volcanic glass stone, and inside there was something for him.
I mean, Mexico is way the hell down there, and you're in here, and that's the way it is.
Haywood said if Andy asked him for a rope, he thought Andy would do the same as Brooks did. Andy is back in his routine of making Norton's financial records. After returning to his cell, Andy pulled out a rope, and when the morning arrived, the guards didn't see Andy coming out of his cell. After checking, it turned out that Andy was not there.
Oh my Lord.
And Red, who was known to be close to him, was asked by the chief warden.
You see Dufresne's name there? I sure do. See, right there. Dufresne.
Until he threw some stone and found a tunnel behind the poster taped to the wall. The police immediately moved to hunt Andy, but could not find him. Almost 20 years, Andy dug the tunnel and always threw his quarry while on the ground.
I remember thinking it would take a man 600 years to tunnel through the wall with it.
He also took deposits and securities belonging to the chief warden and the rope he used to carry valuables. He even destroyed the drain pipe and crawled through it until it reached a river.
500 yards of shit-smelling foulness I can't count. 500 yards.
In the end, he was able to breathe free air. Andy, with his new identity, goes into a bank to cash out deposits and submits evidence of Norton's crimes.
Years.
The police were sent into prison to arrest him along with Hadley, but he prefers to kill himself. Andy sent a letter to Red that made them quite happy with his success.
Fort Hancock, Texas.
The day it was even 40 years Red to serve his sentence, and this time his parole application was approved by a jury. After his release, Red came to the house where Brooks committed suicide. He almost feels the same way Brooks feels. But Red remembers his promise to Andy. He came to a garden and looked for a long black stone, and inside he finds a box containing letters and money. In the letter, it says where he should go, which turns out to be where Andy is. And the movie is finished. Okay, that's the story of the movie Shawshank Redemption, 1994. Don't forget to like and share. Subscribe also if you haven't. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.